The room buzzed with tension long before the cameras rolled. It wasn't the noise, it was the silence beneath it. A kind of anticipatory hum, the kind that creeps in when people know something, or someone, is about to shift the air. The hearing was officially about federal education funding and curriculum standards, but everyone knew it was about something bigger: control, identity. Whose version of America would define the next generation? Representative Jasmine Crockett sat at the far end of the semicircle, her expression unreadable, her binder thick with notes, testimony, and, more importantly, stories. She had flown in late the night before, barely slept, and skipped the breakfast briefing. That was fine. She didn't come here to be briefed. She came ready. At the center of the room, seated with his usual posture of assured defiance, was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Blue suit, flag pin, the calculated confidence of someone who'd already decided what the truth was. He hadn't spoken yet, but his presence filled the space. When the chairwoman called the session to order, DeSantis leaned back, fingers clasped, eyes scanning like a general surveying a battlefield. The testimonies began. First came a superintendent from Ohio, then a parent from Texas, then a curriculum specialist from California. Their voices were earnest, but the room stayed flat. DeSantis didn't flinch, didn't blink, just waited. And then Jasmine Crockett was recognized. She adjusted her microphone, slowly. The room shifted, not dramatically, just a few heads turning, a few eyebrows raising. People who knew that when she spoke she didn't perform, she revealed. "Madam Chair," she began, her voice even but unmistakably firm. "I represent a district where classrooms are overcrowded and school roofs leak when it rains. Where teachers buy their own supplies and students share outdated textbooks that still list George W. Bush as president." She paused, not for effect, but to let the reality settle. "And yet," she continued, "we're told that the real threat to education is what books our children read. Not that they're missing meals, not that their buses are falling apart, not that they've never seen a school nurse." Across the room, DeSantis lifted his pen, twirling it slowly between his fingers. Still silent, still watching. Crockett didn't look at him. Not yet. Instead, she opened her binder and held up a photo, an image of a second-grade classroom in South Dallas, ceiling tiles stained with water damage, desks pushed to the walls to avoid leaks. "This is what neglect looks like," she said. But somehow, the conversation keeps shifting away from fixing it, to controlling it, to restricting access, to deciding which parts of our shared history are too uncomfortable to teach. She finally turned her gaze to DeSantis. "I've read your legislation, Governor," she said, voice still calm. "I've seen how you've banned books that mention slavery, redlining, and civil rights under the guise of protecting children. But I represent children who are living the consequences of those very histories." DeSantis offered a tight smile. Just a flicker. But Crockett didn't stop. "I came here not to be polite, but to be clear. Truth is not divisive. It's uncomfortable. And that's why some people try to silence it." The murmurs began, soft at first, then rising like a wave, trying not to crash too soon. Staffers glanced at one another. Journalists adjusted their phones, readying for the clip. But Jasmine hadn't even gotten started. Ron DeSantis didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His smile, slight, contained, and practiced, carried all the weight of his political persona. He leaned toward the mic, nodded once, and began. "Thank you, Representative Crockett," he said smoothly. "It's always good to hear perspectives from different parts of the country." There it was, a soft shot wrapped in civility. Crockett caught it, of course, but didn't react. DeSantis continued. "Let's be clear. My job as governor is to protect the rights of parents, not to rewrite history, but to make sure it's taught without an ideological agenda." He flipped a page in the printed packet in front of him, gesturing casually. "What we've done in Florida isn't censorship, it's prioritization. We teach American history, real history, but we don't force guilt onto children based on their skin color. That's not education. That's indoctrination. Several senators nodded. A few even offered soft applause despite the formal setting. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd heard it before, this carefully packaged version of truth that erased more than it explained. She leaned forward, her fingers resting gently on the open binder. Her tone didn't rise. Her words did the lifting. "Governor," she said, "you talk about protecting children from guilt, but what about protecting them from ignorance? Because I've seen what it looks like when kids grow up without knowing why their neighborhoods have no grocery stores, why their schools are underfunded, why their families have been shut out of opportunity for generations." She turned a page, calmly. "You say teaching these truths makes some students feel uncomfortable. But do you know what's really uncomfortable? A high school senior in my district working a night shift just to keep the lights on at home, and still failing his civics class because the textbook skips everything after 1975, a few heads turned. A staffer in the second row lowered his phone, not out of disinterest, but to listen more closely. Crockett kept her eyes on DeSantis now. "You don't get to redefine real history just because the truth makes people squirm. You say your legislation is about fairness, but fairness doesn't come from silence." DeSantis responded with a low chuckle, calculated. He reached for his water bottle, took a sip, then looked directly at her. "I'm not here to argue with emotion, Representative," he said. "I'm here to talk about policy." Crockett smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good," she said. "Because my district doesn't need sympathy. It needs infrastructure. It needs equity. It needs truth in its full, messy, uncomfortable context. Because without that, no policy will ever be more than a bandage over a bullet wound." The room tightened again. Not loud, not dramatic, but the energy shifted. One of those moments where two forces met in silence, and the silence itself did the talking. Then Jasmine reached into her folder and pulled out a printed map. "This is Dallas," she said, "broken down by neighborhood. This line here, that's where the highway was built in 1966. You know what it split? Black home ownership, generational stability, education zones." She paused. "You want to talk policy? Then let's talk about the legacy of government decisions and who they helped, or who they erased." DeSantis didn't interrupt, but his smile had thinned. Across the room, a young reporter live tweeting the hearing typed just 7 words. Jasmine just shifted the room again. "Damn." And that was only the second round. The next person to speak was a senator from Georgia, Republican, older, polished. He didn't address Jasmine directly, but he didn't have to. "We've heard a lot about the past," he said, "but I'd like us to focus on the present. Let's not forget that many of our cities are struggling right now. The question is, who's accountable? Because blaming old highway maps doesn't explain today's crime rates or failing schools." Jasmine didn't move. Her face didn't twitch, but her fingertips tapped once against the edge of the binder. Just once. The senator kept going. "If the systems are broken," he added, "shouldn't we look at the leaders currently in charge of those communities?" That was the pivot, subtle but strategic. The room felt it. The implication was clear. The problems in poor, urban, mostly black districts were the fault of their representatives, people like her. DeSantis leaned in again, not to speak yet, but to signal. He was back in his zone. Jasmine waited for the senator to finish, then reached down and pulled out a sheet of handwritten notes. No slides, no charts, just a list of names. "Every time someone talks about crime rates and test scores as if they happened in a vacuum," she said, "I think about people like Ms. Hartwell. She's 72, lives in South Oak Cliff, raised 4 grandkids after her daughter passed. One of those kids, Darius, walks 5 blocks past 3 liquor stores and a payday lender just to get to school." She looked around. "You want to talk about leadership? Start with who's making the rules about where public transit goes, where grocery chains won't invest, where landlords can get away with charging market rent for homes without insulation." DeSantis folded his arms, expression unreadable, but Crockett wasn't watching him anymore. She was speaking to the room, to the country, maybe even to Ms. Hartwell. "The thing about drawing lines, whether it's highways or funding or curriculum, is that someone always ends up on the other side of it, forgotten, blamed, erased. Now she turned to DeSantis. You say you're fighting for parents. I am too. The difference is, your policies choose which parents matter. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere off camera. Jasmine continued, voice steady but more pointed now. You banned discussions of systemic racism under the claim that they're divisive. But our communities have lived the division. We didn't cause it. We survived it. DeSantis uncrossed his arms, his brow tightening slightly, not a full reaction, but closer than before. Crockett leaned in. Governor, if your plan for unity starts with erasing the story of how we got here, then you are not leading. You're gaslighting. That word hit the floor like a hammer. For a moment, no one spoke. And then, quietly, one of the younger aides near the back let out a low, "Whoa." DeSantis picked up his pen again, but this time he didn't write. Outside the chamber, someone clipped Jasmine's last line and posted it within seconds. It didn't need editing, it didn't need music, it just needed the truth. The hearing took a 10-minute recess, but the energy in the room never really cooled. Staffers whispered. Aides checked their phones. The clip of Jasmine's last statement, "You're not leading, you're gaslighting," was already making its way through political Twitter, but Jasmine wasn't watching her mentions. She stood quietly near the back, one hand on her hip, the other still holding the sheet of handwritten names. DeSantis hadn't left the room. He was speaking with a pair of conservative think tank advisors, voice low, gestures tight. He didn't glance her way. He didn't need to. This wasn't over. When they reconvened, it was DeSantis who asked to speak first. I think what we're witnessing here, he began, voice calm but clipped, is a fundamental difference in philosophy. Representative Crockett wants to relitigate the past. I want to secure the future. We don't do that by teaching our children to see themselves as victims. He paused, letting the line sink in. We do it by instilling pride, discipline, work ethic. He looked straight at Jasmine. Not resentment. There was no mistaking it now. This was personal. The room felt it. Jasmine didn't rush her reply. She adjusted her chair, closed her binder gently, and met his gaze fully. Governor, she said, I grew up watching my mother clean houses during the day and stock shelves at night. I watched her stretch a $30 grocery budget into a week's worth of meals. We weren't victims. We were survivors. A ripple moved across the rows of aides and staffers. She wasn't reading anymore. She was remembering. My public high school lost accreditation the year I graduated. No one from the state stepped in. No emergency funding. No press conferences. Just silence. She leaned forward slightly. You want to talk about work ethic? I put myself through law school with 2 jobs. I became a public defender. I saw what the personal responsibility narrative does to people who never had a shot. And I learned that silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. And too many people in power choose it every single day. DeSantis didn't blink, but he shifted. A small thing, but the kind of movement you notice when someone isn't used to being challenged this directly. Jasmine continued, voice clear and sharp. When we don't tell the whole truth in our classrooms, we don't raise stronger citizens. We raise confused ones, kids who don't understand why their zip code shapes their future, kids who think poverty is a moral failure instead of a policy decision. She held up a thin report, no cover, no graphics. This is from your own Department of Education, she said. It shows that the majority of underperforming schools in Florida are in districts with the highest poverty rates. You know what they have in common? A beat. Lack of investment, lack of teachers, lack of access. Not CRT. DeSantis shifted again. His aides looked visibly uncomfortable now. One scribbled something quickly. Jasmine leaned back, but her words stayed strong. You say you're protecting children, but what you're really protecting is power. The power to define history, to erase context, to maintain control. She tapped the binder once. But I didn't come here for control. I came here for clarity. And in that moment, the line between politician and advocate, between official and citizen, blurred. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just representing her district. She was representing every person who's been talked over, dismissed, or erased, and who finally had someone speaking with the mic on. The room wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. That strange in-between hush settled in, the kind that lives between discomfort and awakening. People shifted, eyes darted, a few staffers tapped notes they wouldn't dare read aloud. DeSantis leaned in again, but this time the smooth confidence was a little thinner. The pause before he spoke was just a second longer. With all due respect, he began, his voice carefully modulated. I won't stand here and be accused of erasing history just because I don't want children burdened by guilt over things they didn't do. The words hung in the air, framed like a shield, wrapped in civility. But Jasmine Crockett was done waiting for civility to catch up to justice. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered it. Governor, she said quietly, my grandfather was a sharecropper in East Texas. He didn't get an education past the 3rd grade. My mother raised us with grit, but no savings, no insurance, and no safety net. A pause. When I talk about history, I'm not asking anyone to feel guilty. I'm asking them to understand the soil this country is built on, because some of us are still bleeding from what was planted in it. Silence. Jasmine turned a page, then held it up. A black and white photo of a neighborhood leveled by a federal highway in the 1960s. A red circle highlighted the street her uncle had lived on before the state took the House for Progress. They said it was necessary, she added, but they never came back with solutions for the people they displaced. Just concrete, just silence. She looked at DeSantis again. That silence, it's still happening, and it sounds a lot like what you're saying today. He opened his mouth slightly, maybe to respond, but closed it again. She kept going. You talk about unity, about patriotism, but real patriotism is loving this country enough to tell the truth about it, not just the parts that make us proud, but the parts we need to fix. A murmur rose, louder than before. Reporters typed faster now. Then Jasmine reached for something new, not from the binder, from her pocket, a folded note. I keep this with me, she said. It's from a young woman named Alina in my district. She's 16. She wrote, my school banned the book that helped me understand why my brother went to jail. They said it made white kids uncomfortable. But what about me? A beat. Tell me, Governor, who's protecting her? Now it was DeSantis who sat back, hands still, eyes unmoving. He didn't answer. And for the first time since the hearing began, the room went still. By the time the hearing ended for the day, the clip had been viewed over 2 million times. No edits, no dramatic music. Just Jasmine Crockett, holding that folded note, asking one simple, devastating question: who's protecting her? The moment spread like wildfire across platforms. On TikTok, teenagers stitched themselves into the video, holding banned books. On Instagram, teachers posted photos of empty classroom bookshelves. On X, the quote trended for 8 straight hours. We're not asking for guilt, we're asking for truth. Cable news picked it up by evening. One conservative host tried to dismiss it as emotional grandstanding, but even his co-anchor hesitated. Another network opened its 7 p.m. segment with Crockett's voice echoing over footage of inner-city schools and rural towns alike. But Jasmine wasn't watching the news. She was in her district office in South Dallas. Fluorescent lights overhead, a microwave humming somewhere in the background. Staffers were printing call logs by the minute. Emails poured in. One was from a retired librarian in St. Petersburg. Another from a mother in Tallahassee whose son had been suspended for quoting a banned book in class. And then a call came through from Miami, a student, nervous, quiet. Tell her, I didn't know anyone in Congress talked like that. Jasmine heard it, didn't say much, just nodded. That night, DeSantis' team released a statement. Governor DeSantis stands by his record of empowering parents, defending curriculum integrity, and upholding American values. He will not be swayed by partisan theatrics. But it didn't land, because the moment had moved beyond spin. The next morning, the New York Times ran a quote in their op-ed section. We didn't ask for the knife, but we've been bleeding ever since. Representative Jasmine Crockett. And under it, why her voice cut through the noise. In Tallahassee, aides huddled around laptops, recalculating political fallout. Some wanted to ignore it, others weren't so sure. A strategist reportedly asked, "What if she's shifting the narrative?" But it wasn't just narrative, it was momentum. In Austin, a group of college students organized a Truth Teaches rally on campus. One held a cardboard sign that read, "If telling history makes you uncomfortable, maybe you're part of the story." That same evening, a public school teacher in Fort Myers created a lesson plan based on the hearing. It was taken down within hours, but not before screenshots spread across the internet. Back in Dallas, Jasmine sat quietly at her desk. She wasn't celebrating. She was reviewing a draft of new legislation focused on curriculum protection and community-centered history programs. Her staff was already working on outreach. This moment wouldn't be wasted. But before the day ended, she scribbled a note on a sticky pad. "This isn't the end of the conversation. This is the start of the correction." She stuck it to the edge of her monitor and went back to work. The draft legislation was only 12 pages long, but its language was direct, surgical even. It proposed the creation of federally protected community truth funds, grants for schools to teach local history with verified, uncensored materials. It prohibited states from penalizing teachers for discussing historically marginalized communities. It mandated student access to public archives. It was named the Alina Act. When journalists asked about the name, Jasmine just said, "She's the reason we're doing this out loud." But the noise wasn't quieting down. By now, high school debate teams were quoting Crockett in national finals. Student newspapers were reprinting her speech. Even a conservative columnist, known for his critiques, admitted on air, "I don't agree with her politics, but she made people listen. That's rare." Ron DeSantis, meanwhile, was cornered by questions at a press event in Jacksonville. "Do you regret the exchange?" one reporter asked. He smiled tight. "I stand by what I said. I believe in strength, not shame." But even his supporters had noticed something. For once, he wasn't winning the soundbite war. Back in D.C., Jasmine walked through the halls of Congress with a folder under her arm, not full of policy briefs, but letters, real ones, typed, handwritten, emailed, printed, from teachers in Ocala, from students in Pensacola, from pastors in Daytona Beach. Some praised her. Some simply said, "Thank you for not backing down." She didn't dramatize them. She didn't weaponize them. She treated them as evidence. On the House floor, she stood again, this time not across from DeSantis, but in front of her peers. "I'm not introducing this bill because I want to fight," she said. "I'm doing it because someone has to start listening." She told them about Ms. Hartwell, about Alina, about the high school that lost accreditation and never got it back, about what it means to be represented not as a problem, but as a voice. "I'm tired of dignity being politicized, history being filtered, pain being made partisan." And then she paused, not for effect, for gravity. "Because if truth becomes a threat," she said, "then maybe the system was never built for truth to begin with." The chamber was quiet, not out of deference, out of reckoning. One Republican representative, who had voted against a similar education bill months earlier, approached her after the session. "I still have issues with the wording," he said carefully. "But I've got a school in my district dealing with the same bans. Maybe we talk." Jasmine didn't smile. She nodded once. That night, the story hit national headlines again. The Alina Act gains unexpected support. And just like that, testimony was no longer just about telling stories. It was turning into something heavier, sharper, unignorable. It was policy. The morning of the final vote on the Alina Act, the sky over D.C. was an overcast gray. Jasmine arrived early, coffee in one hand, binder in the other. No entourage, no cameras, just her and the moment. The bill had survived committee scrutiny, partisan edits, and hours of procedural hurdles. It was still far from guaranteed, but further than anyone expected. As she passed through the rotunda, a Capitol janitor nodded at her. Appreciate what you said last week, he murmured. Jasmine smiled. Thanks for listening. Inside the chamber, things were quiet. Too quiet. DeSantis wasn't there, but his influence was. The tension clung to the walls like humidity. As the speaker gavelled in the session, Jasmine rose. Not for drama. For duty. She didn't launch into a speech. Not this time. She told a story. About her father, a machinist who lost his job when the factory shut down. About her mother, who taught her how to cook dinner without electricity when the bills went unpaid. About the night she sat in the dark as a kid, reading from a school textbook by candlelight, whispering to herself, "Someday I'll change this." Then she paused. Not to gather herself, to gather everyone else. There are folks in this country who think silence is the cost of professionalism, she said, that keeping your voice low makes you more reasonable, that if you make noise, you're angry, disruptive, emotional. She glanced around the chamber. Well, maybe we should be emotional. Maybe truth should shake the room. She took a deep breath. Because I remember what it was like to sit in a classroom and realize the history they were teaching had holes in it big enough to fall through. A rustle of movement, some nods, some uneasy shifts. I introduced the Alina Act, not because it's perfect, but because perfect is a luxury we don't have, especially when the truth is already late. She looked toward the front bench. And if this vote fails, I'll bring it back. And if it fails again, I'll bring it louder. Because silence is comfortable for the people who benefit from it, but not for the rest of us. There was no applause, no grandstanding ovation, just stillness, respectful, heavy. The vote was called. It didn't pass, but it wasn't buried either. 27 Republicans abstained, many more than expected. A few crossed over. The conversation was no longer theoretical. Afterward, as Jasmine walked out, a freshman congresswoman from a swing district caught up to her. "I've got teachers calling me," she said, "saying they feel seen. That's never happened before." Jasmine didn't say anything at first. Then, "They've always been there. The difference is now." Someone finally turned the mic toward them. That night, back in her district, Jasmine visited the same community center where she'd once held office hours, with folding chairs and lukewarm coffee. It was full now. Students, parents, elders who'd watched her hearing clip 3 times and still cried every time. Someone asked what's next. Jasmine smiled. "We keep showing up," she said. "We keep talking. And when they tell us to lower our voices, we pass the mic." Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch, she didn't blink. And when the moment called for truth, she didn't hold back. What started as a political hearing became something more. A reminder that history isn't just about the past. It's about who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and who gets erased. Ron DeSantis brought the rules. Jasmine brought the reality. And in that chamber, beneath the weight of silence and power, her voice echoed with something deeper than politics. Memory, justice, and the fight to be seen. This wasn't about winning a debate. This was about refusing to let anyone rewrite the struggle. And if you've ever felt silenced, overlooked, or told your truth was too much, let this be your reminder. You don't have to yell to be heard. You just have to stand up and speak it anyway. Because when Jasmine Crockett took the mic, she didn't just speak truth to power, she made power listen.